No high UNC official met any PDP official.
You don't need the UNC to pass the bill.
This is the worst and they need to go.
Fire burn you, Guardian.
How much more could we tolerate?
You lack the intellect and the competence.
Everywhere else is vaccinating except Trinidad and Tobago.
You cannot pay people money that you owe them.
Good night, Trinidad and Tobago. We are here in San Fernando West for our version of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Amendment Bill 2020 discussion. This is a series of discussions that have been taking place in many constituencies throughout the country as per a mandate by our party and our political leader to call upon the People's National Movement to repeal this ridiculous bill that was brought last year to whittle down something as important as this Public Procurement Act that was passed in 2014 by the People's Partnership Administration. We are here at the UNC headquarters in Emram Prasad, and as I mentioned before, it is the San Fernando West and East version of this discussion that is taking place here tonight. This evening, we have a dynamic slate of speakers carded to share their opinions and their views with you, the listening and viewing public, as to why this particular bill should be repealed. This evening, I am joined with Councillor Marcus Gidari of the San Fernando City Corporation. I'm also joined by our research officer of the United National Congress, NATEX, Ms. Monifa Alexander. And joining us via Zoom would be our chief economist at the Office of the Opposition Leader, former Senator and my good friend, Tahaka Obika. As some of you may know, I am former Senator and Policy and Strategy Officer of the United National Congress, NATEX, Sean Sobers, and I will be the moderator for this evening's proceedings, as well as I'm an attorney at law. So I will give that legal aspect, or legal perspective rather, on this particular bill. Here in San Fernando, East and West, we always like to do things a bit differently. And having viewed many of the proceedings that have taken place thus far, we've recognized in terms of combing through this particular bill, something that hasn't been properly touched on by any of the other discussions that have traversed the UNC universe, as I like to call it. And that is really zeroing in on the genesis of this particular Procurement Act within our country, or this procurement discussion, the existence of procurement legislation in our country. Now, many times we have a lot of critique to level against the People's National Movement and their administration. And I would dare say to all my colleagues seated here tonight that that critique is always ever warranted. But in this particular discussion, we have to give credit where credit is due. And having gone through this particular bill, this amendment that was moved last year, we recognize as a team here that the genesis of this particular bill stemmed from a particular discussion, particular allegations that were leveled against a sitting Prime Minister back in 2008 in our Parliament. And that the architect behind those allegations spun into reality procurement in this country. Because at that point in time, the individual who leveled those allegations against none other than Prime Minister Patrick Manning recognized that there was a lot of wrongdoing taking place at a state entity by the name of UDCOT under the hand of the then chairman, Calder Hart. And those allegations of bid rigging and wrongdoing leveled against the government of the day, his government, his party, his prime minister, his chairman, Calder Hart, is what really triggered the need for procurement in this country. And when we as a party, a political party, tell you, the people of this country, that you cannot trust the People's National Movement, that they are hypocrites of the highest order, we know exactly what we are saying. And we have the evidence to support that. Time and time again, we demonstrate that to you. This evening will be no different. We were lucky enough to find video evidence of those allegations against Prime Minister Patrick Manning by none other than the current Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. Allegations of bid rigging, as I mentioned before, and the need for rigorous procurement legislation in this country. Have a look at that video.
I went to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago in August 2003 as a Minister of Government in Trinidad and Tobago, a PNM Minister, and told him that there was bid rigging taking place in UDCOT. What the Commission of Inquiry is looking at is 10 times worse than what happened with Biako Airport. And it's even more brazen. The PNM is on trial because those of us who were here and carried the O'Halloran stain, we cannot take the position that this is all talk. In 1986, when we went to campaign in my area, I was there. I don't know who else was there. I was there. And you're going door to door and they're slamming doors in your face in Westmorings, in Glencoe, in Bayshore, and all they tell you about is O'Halloran. And today, every school child in this country knows that there's something called UDCOT and it smells to the high heavens. It smells to the high heavens. If this country cannot call to order its Prime Minister and his cabinet and his political party to say we are not accepting that, then God help us. Why should people be sacrificed so as to allow others, wrongdoers, to prosper? That is what we're being called upon to do, colleagues. That's what we're being called upon to do. And those of you who think that I'm being obstructionist and I'm being whatever you want to, what we are being called upon to do by a small clique of people in the country is to support wrongdoing, pretend not to know, and see if we can ride it out. We are not going to ride this out. $700 million worth of contract lands on the Princess Building ground. Not a soul in Port of Spain, in Belmont, in Cascade, in Laventille, in Depo Martin got 1 day's work there. 100% Chinese work. Design, construction, materials, everything. And I am supposed to support that. And if I don't support it, I get myself slandered in and out of Parliament by my own Prime Minister.
And that is why we need proper procurement legislation. Dr. Rowley, back then a member of the parliament, a member of the government, before he became prime minister, before he was opposition leader, highlighted the need for proper procurement legislation based upon a lot of wrongdoing, as he indicated in that video, in that clip, that was taking place by UDCOT under the hand and the chairmanship of Colder Heart and under the watchful eye of the then Prime Minister, Patrick Manning. And I totally agree, without fear of contradiction, with one of the things that was said by Dr. Rowley. If we as a country, if we as a responsible opposition, if we as a responsible United National Congress party cannot call our parliament and hold them to order, cannot hold the government of this country to order and demand that they do the right thing, then heaven help us all. And that is the need, that is the call, the mandate that was made by our political leader, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, when she understood the egregious errors, the wrongs that were being perpetuated upon this country by the People's National Movement in whittling down this legislation. And in the height of proper hypocritical behavior, the same person that we just showed you in that clip, who called upon his prime minister to right the wrongs that were taking place in Unicott. The allegations that triggered the Commission of Inquiry that spent out 91 recommendations as to what was wrong with what was taking place in Unicott is the same person now who is the Prime Minister of this country, and under his hand allowed the government of the day to come to the Parliament with a bill that whittled down procurement legislation in this country. You cannot be more hypocritical than that. And it is taking or accounting for the history of this legislation as we come up the road. We recognize that persons like Dr. Tiwari, Boindranath Tiwari, as he then was a member of Parliament, spoke about some of those 91 recommendations whilst he was piloting the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property No. 2 bill in 2014. And he said, and I quote, "So from these recommendations, we see that there were problems in the last administration of the PNM, having to do with corruption issues, having to do with value for money issues, and having to do with local content and local participation and inclusion issues." And that is the history of the PNM with respect to procurement in this country. It is no secret. It is there for everyone to see. And what the People's Partnership Administration did is that they took a serious look at getting procurement right and ensuring that the bill became law by passing that Public Procurement Act in 2014. And they didn't do it by VAPs. They had mass consultations with stakeholders in 2014. And they went out and they spoke to persons throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. That consultative team was headed by none other than Timothy Hamel-Smith, the former Senate President. And at every turn of the dial, every step of the way, the PNM either did not take part in the Joint Select Committees or they didn't vote when the time came for them to so do on the procurement legislation. That is the history of the PNM. And even subsequent to the passing of the legislation, the only thing that was left for the Parliament to ensure that the legislation was proclaimed was to ensure that the regulations that were supposed to accompany the act were supposed to be passed. And those regulations were sent in since 2017 by the Office of the Procurement Regulator. And they were ignored. And yet in 2020, when they want to tell you that they're serious about procurement in this country, that they're ready to pass the act and make it law, they come and they whittle down the legislation by bringing about this bill that would amend the act that we passed in 2014 in 3 specific ways. And I'll touch on those ways, and then I'll pass it along to my colleagues who are here present tonight. Clause 5 of that particular bill intends to amend Section 7.2 of the Procurement Act, which removes proper oversight for government-to-government arrangements and government-to-international financial institution arrangements. And examples of acts that would fall under such arrangements would have been the procurement of those hostile vessels, would have been that China Gazubo contract that we got our hands on, and we called upon the government to repeal that particular contract because there was no benefit that would have redounded to the citizenry of this country. And under this particular incarnation of the bill, these are things that will be cloaked in darkness, and we would not have an opportunity to properly question. Clause 5 also seeks to amend Section 7.5 of the bill, which will ensure that the Act will no longer be able to cover legal, financial, accounting, and auditing services, medical services, and the catch-all clause, which is such other services as the minister by order may determine. So at any point in time, any service that is not properly captured here in this particular clause, the minister can wake up in the morning and decide that it should not be covered by the Act. And these are things that should be exempted. And that can be exhaustive in nature. And it is and it is in fact cause for serious concern by the opposition. And clause 6 seeks to amend section 13.1.0, which deletes from the function of the procurement regulator his ability to question and have oversight over the disposal of state assets and state property. And we have heard many commentators talk about how egregious that particular amendment is. That there are several state assets, pieces of state property that belong to you, that belong to me, tax-paying citizens, or patrimony, that should go through some proper procurement process before it is just willfully and negligently just given away. And these are the things that we are calling upon this administration to seriously think about. And hence the reason for the call of the repeal of this particular bill. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm joined with some colleagues here tonight who also have their opinion from different perspectives and different backgrounds pursuant to their professions that they would like to share with you this evening on this particular bill. Councillor Gidari.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Sobers, and good afternoon and good evening to all viewing audience and listening audience. And what you've shared is indeed a fact, and I could speak from the position of local government, being a councillor in the local government arena for the San Fernando City Corporation. And who would not want proper accountability for tax spending, for the funds that are public funds that are being administered and overseen by the stewardship of those in authority? And I have seen it, and we at council have, on the UNC side, have spoken about it so many times and questioned the manner in which funds are being treated with at the local government level. And it is one of the things that is so important for us as representatives of the people when our residents for various electoral districts that we represent, the UNC, that is Marabella South, Vistabella, Lesafort East, Lesafort West, Laramie, as well as Marabella East. These councillors that represent the UNC in the San Fernando City Corporation, we have asked the question at council simply, who are the persons, for example, that oversee the procurement and granting of contracts for the San Fernando City Corporation? And to our surprise, we were told there is indeed as is expected, committee for which tenders are viewed and adjudicated. But when we ask the question, who are the persons, the parties to this committee? It is the CEO, the deputy mayor, a PNM councillor, and the person in charge of the contracts department. There is nobody from the opposition present. Nobody to question or to oversee what is the decisions that are being made with respect to the granting of contracts. And so what the amendment is giving is the strengthening of these individuals to do what they want with the funds. As you've shared, Mr. Sobers, you know, the minister for local government could simply come out and say, well, there is no need to, or why don't we do this, and so on and so on. And without fear of contradiction or question, it will be acted upon. And we at the local government level, members of the UNC for the San Fernando City Corporation, are saying this cannot be. Because we have a right to our residents who have elected us all to be responsible for the funds that we manage on their behalf. And so we see it as being pertinent and important that we do have that third party, that independent body to really regulate the administration of these public funds as we seek to do the daily duty in expediency for the improvement of the San Fernando City Corporation. And I'm not just speaking from the San Fernando City Corporation's perspective, but I'm speaking from local government perspective. Because what would happen in one corporation can happen in any other of the 9 corporations. And so it is important that we do have that third entity that is standalone to oversee and question what is being done.
I couldn't agree with you more, Councillor Gidari, because many a times when we are, just about and walking about and traversing the city or going to different districts, we see contractors who may not necessarily come from the particular district being involved in work and in activities. And sometimes I question or I wonder, what opportunity is really being given to the people on the ground in those districts for them to better themselves. And that is where the question of procurement comes in. Because if there is no proper tendering process that is being adhered to, and monies are being spent not in a judicious manner, but arbitrarily, decisions are being made by one person, that is totally against the fabric of what a proper procurement process is about. And this is why it is important for us to point these things out to the public so that they understand and appreciate how dangerous it is for us to continue going down this road that the PNM is peddling. And hence the reason for conversations like this and for the calling of a repeal of this particular bill.
And you're so correct, because even at council, when we have our finance committee for the approval of payments, you see it week after week. Is the same set of contractors that are coming up as payments to be made for various works. What about, as you're saying, what about the other individuals, and some of them that they are not resident to the city of San Fernando? Is it that we do not have individuals within the city of San Fernando that could do the said job? Is it that we do not have individuals with the capability and skills in the city of San Fernando that we can develop? And so these are some of the things, and you are right, with respect to the procurement. Is it that we only have 3 or 4 contractors for which public funds can be paid for services? Another thing that we may have, that we've seen as well, is where you have the payment of a particular service being given to a contractor, and the payment is even beyond what is customary practice for payment in terms of cost. How do we go about, how do we, rightfully say that the cost of a particular service is supposed to be X amount when we believe that it is 3 times that figure? And so the need for proper procurement is indeed a hemorrhage to public funds throughout Trinidad. I could say that with fear of contradiction.
And hence the reason why, in terms of some of the recommendations made by the Off Inquiry or the Off Commission of Inquiry, one of the more important points that were made in terms of recommendations was value for money. Value for money. That is why we really, really need to focus on this procurement. Now, Councillor Gidari, thank you so much. I would want to pass it on now to our research officer, Ms. Monifa Alexander. Ms. Monifa Andrews. I don't know why I call her Alexander. All right, Monifa.
Thank you very much, Sean. Welcome, Marcus. And welcome to our viewers. Thank you very much for being with us here this evening. This is a very, very serious topic, and I take great opportunity to be here today. Why I live in the constituency of San Fernando East. And as a person moving around, when I go to the grocery in the plaza in Pleasantville there, or I even walk my area, I meet a lot of people. And I have to make sure that they understand what is going on. People are very concerned, and they are telling me that we are their voice. What I have been doing is speaking with individuals, giving a simple breakdown on procurement. My role here at the UNC is the research officer, which I love researching. Research is knowledge. The most important thing, I would be able to pass information, not just my opinion, but what is the facts. See, when a person understands procurement, they would understand the need to repeal the Procurement Amendment Act. I have even gone as far as giving an example to individuals when I meet them, an example to look at procurement taking place in their home. For instance, if they want to buy a television, there are things that you look for. You don't just go and buy a television. You look for a good supplier. You look at price, brand, size, warranty. You may even call a friend, and they may even recommend a store. Then you may discuss it with your spouse, your kids. You make that selection based on all the factors for a good of this purchase for your home. So my point is, this is for individuals. When I chat with them, this is for individuals to see how many persons are really involved in that procurement process. Some of the individuals, they have asked, and what is in it for me? They have to repeal this Procurement Amendment Act. I will explain, I will tell them, and you will get the best out of your tax dollar. You see, without proper or effective procurement, hospitals, they wait for drugs, teachers for textbooks. These are examples that I would give them. Streets for good roads. Without efficient procurement, money gets wasted on a very large scale. Lack of transparency and corruption in procurement directly affects citizens. Civil servants, or those who operate and directly interact with the system, care a great deal about the risk that could affect their jobs or careers. I went on a little to explain to them about POs and RFQs. When you have to purchase an item where there's already an approved supplier, the purchase order will be sent for approval by the designated procurement or finance team. And if, just say it was rejected, it will be sent back with a reason. And on approval, the purchase order becomes a purchase requisition. So these are all the things that I would touch, and I will explain to the individuals when I meet them. For a purchase that does not have a pre-approved supplier or vendor, the procurement team sends out multiple RFQs detailing the requirements. And when the purchase items are received, now I do a very simple breakdown so that I will not confuse them. When the purchase items are received, the vendor's invoice goes through a three-way matching verification to verify that the order is correct. So of course you must verify to ensure that what was ordered is exactly what you received, and of course time as well is very important. In a nutshell, I break down the word procurement. Procurement is used to refer to buying for a business on a large scale. It involves the buyer and the seller. But in the act of buying, that is labeled procurement. Great care and attention must be paid to the activities that procurement entails. And these are some of the things that you must pay attention to: vendor selection, payment negotiation, strategic vetting, final selection, contract negotiation, and final purchase. You see, every procurement management process consists of 3 P's. Process, people are the stakeholders, and paperwork. And some people, you know, they don't like paperwork, but they will understand exactly how paperwork is important. There are also the 5 pillars of procurement. Value for money must be the uttermost factor of the vendor for the selection of the item. Open competition. This creates a process that is bias-free and transparent. And when we say transparent, we mean it crystal clear. Ethics and transparency, accountability and record keeping. And the 5th one, equity. Procurement focuses on evaluating risk before they become bigger and cause problems. This brings to memory a Newsday article. I do not know if how many of you remember Tuesday the 29th of September 2020, headline, TST overbilled taxpayers by 300 million. I quote, State Telecom Company, TSTT overcharged taxpayers by 300 million for providing cameras to the government. Rowley said, as head of the cabinet, I know of such thing. What I do know is that we do owe TSTT some money. End of quote. In this regard, excellent record-keeping practices make it easier to trace the steps of procurement. Having clarity and accuracy, the pricing is clearly stated and agreed upon, and it prevents future disputes and leave no room for misunderstanding, such as we owe in? No. Yes, we owe in. Yes, that amount. No, not that amount. We cannot have that in this country. We cannot accept that type of behavior in this country. An example, the COVID-19 vaccines, we have to pay attention to the major R's of principles of purchasing. We have the right quality. We have the right quantity, where you can have bulk order, or you can have arbitrary order quantity. You have to pay attention to right time. The time at which the purchases are to be made is of vital importance. We don't want to come and get the vaccines and now we're here and the expiry date is right around the corner. Time is a factor. We talk about right source. You pay attention to the right price. Price is always important. Deciding the right price of a product depends on variety of factors. Quality, delivery time, and ultimate life of the material. Demand and supply curve. Extent of competition. Government restrictions. And a lot others.
Monifa, you know, I actually just would want to piggyback off of something that you raised there, and you spoke about this issue with respect to the vaccines.
Yeah.
Now, there's no secret that we are going through a vaccine problem, a vaccine fiasco in this country with respect to how the People's National Movement is handling the procurement of vaccines,
yes,
and then the distribution of the said vaccines to Trinbagonian citizens. When you juxtapose where we're at with respect to vaccination and vaccinating our citizens within our country compared to everybody else within the region,
yeah,
we are dead last.
Yes.
We can't even fight for anybody with that. We were last.
Yes.
Bottom of the barrel.
And that's not who we are.
And under the amendments that were moved by this particular administration, medical services under that Clause 5 amending Section 7.5 would be taken out of the remit with respect to procurement. So they could do what they want when it comes to procuring these vaccines.
Yes.
And in addition to what you were saying, I know that when we had these discussions a couple of weeks ago with respect to having this conversation this evening, I know that you indicated that you were going to pound the pavement and really go out there and ask the reasonable man, the man on the street, the vendors, the taxi drivers, what do they think about procurement? And you really hit the nail on the head with respect to that example that you gave. Something as simple as purchasing a television set within your home,
yes,
requires some degree of procurement.
Yes.
So that people out there, the citizens of our country, do in fact recognize the need for proper procurement within
Yes.
our country.
Yes.
Right? And that, when we were discussing, people are angry. They're
Yeah.
upset.
They're upset.
Because this will cut out the normal man from having a proper chance, really and truly, to make his name within this country.
Yes.
Right? Because you'll just have, as the Prime Minister would have said in an interview, a famous interview right after the election, the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what is going to happen with improper procurement.
Yes. Yes.
Now, I know we have Chief Economist
Yes.
Tahaka Obika as well too. So let's see what Tahaka has to say on this issue of procurement. He's no stranger to this discussion. He shared his opinion before, and we welcome him this evening. Tahaka.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney at Law and former Senator, former colleague in the Senate. I just want to confirm that you're hearing me clearly.
Crystal clear.
So, to all your viewers and listeners online, a wonderful evening. Procurement, in one phrase, prevents corruption. In another phrase, corruption is a tax on national income. So if corruption is a tax on the treasury, on the funds available to the state to provide for us, the citizens, the taxpayers, if corruption is a tax on our national treasury, then procurement is the system and process by which we prevent corruption from happening in the first place. So corruption is the tax, the evil tax on our treasury, and procurement systems and the regulator for procurement is the big policeman at the gate preventing this corruption from happening. And the better resourced and the more teeth that this procurement bulldog, this procurement regulator has, the more difficult it will be for those bandits, those political thieves that would want to raid our nation's treasury. So what we have is a procurement act that the People's Partnership government led by Kamala Prasad-Bissessar would have gotten passed into law, and that would have been supported. It was a bipartisan approach. It was not a system where the government did their own thing, even though they had a constitutional majority. They ensured that they got support from all stakeholders, the Law Association, the opposition at the time, led by Keith Rowley. And in the 2015 elections, Keith Rowley promised that he would ensure that the Office of the Procurement Regulator is resourced and that the Act becomes into force in terms of regulations and so on. What happened after that was a direct reversal. He did a 180 degree, as we say in geometry. So the entire country was going left, he went right, and brought two substantive amendments that, with the second one, the last one in 2020 in December, if I were to paraphrase the Law Association, it emasculates the law. It basically renders the procurement process that was generated by this country impotent, irrelevant. Because here you have on one end a procurement regulator who is well resourced, autonomous, independent. In terms of their security of tenure, they have properly covered the Act, prepared the human resource requirements in such a way that they could be properly insulated from political interference. But then, with the amendments that the government has brought, they have created a second track. You know, as I was speaking to one of our councillors in Central, and she was saying the correct phrase is the cutting track for Guti to run. So they have basically cut track for Guti to run straight through the forest of the watchdogs against corruption, that would be the procurement regulator. And the roads that lead on this path that allows for rampant corruption lead straight at the doorstep of the Cabinet and the Minister of Finance. Because here you have it, by order, they can, and they have then demonstrated so, they can remove the restrictions for procurement accountability in contracts. We're talking about contracts that could go into the billions of dollars, away from the Office of the Procurement Regulator to the exemption zone. As you did, medicals exempted. So you could be providing services, you could be purchasing 100 beds for the hospitals in our country. You could be providing facilities, medical facilities that could cost taxpayers, let's say it should have costed 50 million, but because you don't have to account for expenses and you can run it through your partner in the Minister of Finance, it could end up costing 150 million. And the tax that corruption is would be the $100 million that should have never been spent to get something that should rightfully cost taxpayers $50 million. So instead of paying 50, you pay 150. No right-thinking citizen will ever agree to such a thing. Not even the wrong-thinking ones. No one will agree to give away their money. All right? So the reality is they have created this second track that benefits no one except the friends, family members, and financiers of the government. But beyond that, they've gone even further. Government-to-government arrangements. You have government-to-government arrangements and saying that if they have to buy boats, military boats from the Australian government, they don't want to be bound. The Australians, that is, they are speaking for the Australians and the Venezuelans and whoever else they want to buy stuff from. They would not want to be bound by our standards of procurement that are too rigorous and call for too much accountability and too much transparency because they want to make sure that there's no corruption. They don't want to be bound by any system that protects citizens. They want to allow this next government, bearing in mind that around the world, corruption, when corruption at the state level exists, it is because of politicians who are corrupt. So what they have said is, we are going into government-to-government arrangements because no government in the world is corrupt. When in fact, every government, every single government can be guilty of corruption. And what we should do is protect our taxpayers, our treasury, against the corruption of other foreign politicians. So what they are saying is that the governments, and they're trying to make it that the countries have policies. But what it is that they're going to be doing is exposing our taxpayers' income, our national treasury, to the corruption of politicians from overseas. That's one thing. The other thing, they've changed the definition of bid rigging. So before Kidrawley came on this platform in the video showed in the Patrick Manning administration, our bid rigging and the bid rigging with Calder Hat and so on, in the government campus plaza and UDCOT and what have you. But now they have come and changed the definition of bid rigging. So no longer bid rigging in its definition calls for an understanding of an arrangement where persons are trying to influence unduly a process. It goes to uncompetitive behavior, which is a broader term. It is less specific and it is less helpful when it comes to criminal proceedings. And as a result of that, when you take into consideration all these things, the exemptions, for example, medical services and other types of contracts, the government-to-government arrangements, and bid rigging, it shows you that this new law does not help in any way the taxpayer to fight corruption. And the fourth point is the exemption for international lending agencies. Now, normally, when you go to borrow money from an international lending agency, their restrictions are so tight that you should ordinarily expect it to prevent corruption. In fact, when they were going up, Keith Rowley himself is on record as saying countless times that when governments bill using cash without borrowing from international agencies, they're trying to circumvent the rigorous processes of these international agencies. I mean, one could take exception with that argument because building cash doesn't necessarily mean that you're engaging in corruption. Building in cash without a procurement regulator is where you have the opening of the door to corruption. So this government is going now where you have international agencies lending you money, they're not going to subject them. Now, one could argue that international agencies have international best practices and so on. However, we have seen around the world where some of the best meaning international lending agencies, their lending requirements come with so much strings attached that it basically disenfranchises the taxpayers of the country. For example, the IMF, and this is not Tahar Kobika saying this, has been accused on countless occasions of pushing an agenda that is not in the best interest of other countries, which led to the IMF themselves changing the way in which they do business around the world. But if you have Trinidad and Tobago not subjecting international lending agencies, whether it be the Andina Bank in South America, or the IMF, or even our own Caribbean Development Bank, then it doesn't augur well for our standards with procurement. We should be the leader, the standard bearer, not a country that follows. And all in all, what does this mean for the average man? You're driving on the nation's roads, a road that should cost 50 million, costs 100 million, because there is no regulation to protect you with certain contracts. You're going to get medicine at the hospital, see that medication for the elderly, the tens of thousands of elderly citizens that need elder care via the CEDA program. That program that may cost the taxpayer 50 million could cost 100 million. So basically what you will be doing as a taxpayer is paying double, triple in some cases for the same service. And bet your bottom dollar when this government, at the end of this financial year, would have spent $300 billion plus in their 6 years in office. At least half of that money goes into buying goods and services that require procurement processes. So you could imagine if there is corruption, which we know that there is, how much we could save and how much more you could get, how much more hospitals, that school in your community that has not been built because they claim they don't have funds. If there were better corruption measures following the procurement regulator, then maybe in that community that you're in, that early childhood center would have been able to be built. Maybe that road would have been able to be paved. So these are the things that affect the average citizen, wherever you are, whatever walk of life you think you come from.
Tak, you made some really compelling points. And many a times when we used to be discussing a lot of these issues, we spoke heavily about the fact that what is the repercussion for improper procurement? How does that reverberate and affect the citizenry later down the road? And you touched on that squarely when you indicated that the monies that could be used to purchase more hospital beds, we may not have that money because it was improperly spent. The monies that could be used to fix drainage problems, irrigation issues, we wouldn't have that money because it was improperly spent. The monies that could be used to bolster our crime fighting initiatives and bolster the TTPS because they constantly call for more resources, we wouldn't have that money because it was improperly spent. The monies that could be used to ensure that our nation's youth are educated and can lend positively and contribute positively to our society later on, we wouldn't have that money because it was improperly spent because of lack of proper procurement issues. And that is the point that we are trying to make as a party. That is the point that Mrs. Prasad Bisesa is trying to make as a leader, not only of the United National Congress, but as a former Prime Minister, and with the greatest respect, as a leader of this country, that we need proper procurement to save our country. You spoke about $300 billion being spent in 6 years, and half of that may be wasted because of improper procurement, because we go have a set of billionaires running around here because they improperly procure that money. And the poor people in this country are the ones that are going to feel it the most because of improper procurement. People feel that the United National Congress, we just want to come and talk about procurement just like that. A mandate was made for all people to come and talk about procurement, as if we don't have anything to do on a Sunday evening, or Princestown didn't have anything to do Saturday afternoon, or anybody else didn't have anything to do on an afternoon than speak to the public. We all have busy lives, but this is important because we all have children, we all have friends, we all have family members who reside here and intend to continue to reside here. And that is why it is important to save the patrimony of our country. It is not on kicks, it is not on VAPs that we are here. I didn't say it only. Dr. Rowley said it back in 2008 when he leveled accusations against then Prime Minister Patrick Manning, because I suspected then he understood the need for proper procurement. Apart from having doors slammed in his face during that O'Halloran era, he appreciated the need for having money for a rainy day and to develop our nation in a particular way. And that money is being given away. We have to put a stop to it. Part of these amendments that were made take away from the Office of the Procurement Regulator the ability to watch over the disposal of our assets. What is that? I'm a lawyer. In every deed that we see, they talk about mining rights and this right and that right that accompany land. Land is an asset. Infrastructure assets. They can give these things away or sell them for nothing. These are the things that we are asking you, the public, to be concerned about, because they are very serious issues that will affect you in your lifetime, and more importantly, affect your children in their lifetime and in their children's lifetime and in their future. What can we do? Our political leader has been calling on persons to sign these petitions. She's been calling upon us, members of the party, to have these conversations, to enlighten and educate you, the public, because we know the troubles that are coming. You should know as well, because you're experiencing it right now. Procurement is the tip of the iceberg of those problems, and it trickles down into the fabric of our society. Something as important as the procurement and the distribution of vaccines is tied into this procurement legislation. And if that alone does not frighten you and wake you up to get serious, and as Dr. Rowley, not me, I didn't say it, Dr. Rowley said it, to call upon your administration, to call upon the government, to call upon the parliament, to take things serious in this country and to hold them to account for the things that they do or the inaction on their part, then heaven help us, as he said. God help us all. Trinidad and Tobago, it is time to wake up. You have heard the views of all of us here this evening. We appreciate the gravity of the situation that we are currently in and where we are heading to. It is not nice. It is time for us to wake up as a country. Calling for the repeal of this particular amendment and this bill is the beginning. There are many things afoot that you need to be cognizant about. And we need the support as an opposition, now more than ever, as we are seeing not only where this world is heading, but Trinidad and Tobago, more importantly, where we are heading, where we will end up. And it is not where we want to be. Any final thoughts, Councillor Gidari?
Well, I think we've shared in a very comprehensive manner the importance of repealing this Procurement Act. And so I want to petition everyone and beseech you to get out there, have your say by signing the petitions that we have circulating, get your signature on, come on board, because it is about your money that we are trying to protect.
Research Officer Monifa, final thoughts?
I would like very much for TNT, and all of us, we must respect that word process when it comes to procurement. There are 3 components, and one of it is process. The procurement process must be well organized, well designed in order for it to function efficiently. Transparency in the process ensures that there is no corruption or manipulation at any stage. So once we sign the petition and we repeal the Procurement Amendment Act, we won't have to continue this suffering under this government. I thank you.
Chief Economist Tahaka Obika, final thoughts, please.
Where I began, procurement protects the Treasury. Corruption is a tax on the National Treasury. And if the Law Association felt that these amendments emasculated the law, it removed any potency from the procurement law by creating a parallel procurement track that runs to the Minister of Finance, then they must repeal this procurement law if we have to be serious as a nation.
So you've heard comments from all our speakers this evening on the importance of repealing this particular amendment. You've heard comments on why you should join with the opposition under the astute leadership of Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, to call upon this government to do the right thing. We gave you examples of the dangers of where we can end up as a country if improper procurement practices are allowed to continue under this particular administration. And I would like to end where we began, that if citizens of our country cannot call to account its parliament, its government, its prime minister to do the right thing, then heaven help us. Thank you for tuning in this evening. We'll continue to hear conversations by the United National Congress, keeping you up to date and abreast as to what is taking place within our country. Continue to band with us as we will continue to stand with you. God bless our nation, God bless our leader, and God bless the United National Congress. Thank you.